Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 24 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Emily Irwin for this episode. Emily is a therapist and a mindfulness expert based here in Seattle. It seems that mindfulness is all around us these days, so I thought it would be interesting to explore how it might be useful for us as widowed parents, as well as for our kids and teenagers. Emily and I covered a lot of ground in this discussion. What is mindfulness and what is it not? Some common myths and misconceptions about mindfulness. How mindfulness can be beneficial for widowed parents and their kids or teens. Ideas for practicing gratitude, such as a gratitude jar or the gratitude toss. Considerations for trauma-sensitive mindfulness. What is neuroplasticity and how it is something that benefits us throughout our entire lives, not just when we're young. How some early research shows that mindfulness has the potential to improve teens' resilience to stress. And tips for practicing self-compassion and why it's so important. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Emily Irwin. My guest today is Emily Irwin, who is joining us from her home in Seattle, Washington. Emily, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be talking with you today because mindfulness is something that we hear so much about lately. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what it is, what widowed parents should know about it, some ways that we could incorporate mindfulness ideas and practices maybe with ourselves and with our children or teenagers. And I think this is something that that you said when I heard you speak, that mindfulness can really help kids and teens not only to survive, but also to thrive and flourish and grow. And I think that's really what, as widowed parents, we're all hoping for. So I'm really excited to hear more about how mindfulness can come into play here. So before we get more into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in mindfulness?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed mental health counselor associate in Seattle. So that means that I work one-on-one with kids and teens and in a counseling capacity. And I also teach mindfulness. But before that, I was a school counselor and a school psychologist in the public schools in our area. And one summer, we had some reading assignments, and it was reading about mindfulness. And I had never really pursued it, heard about it, really dug into it until that summer, which is sort of surprising considering the field. Mm-hmm. But I got into the mindfulness that summer. I loved the books, and it just felt like a practice in a way of being that matched me and who I was. And I just took off from there and learned as much as I could. Started my own personal practice and got better at teaching it. And a lot of that was done with Mindful Schools, which is a great organization out of California. Mm. And they support educators who want to learn to teach mindfulness, but also they require that you have your own personal practice, which is really important. And so I just started there and have just built on it, read about it, practiced it, gone on retreats, and incorporate it into everything that I do, both professionally and personally at this point. It's a big, big part of my life. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. Well, this would be great then. And I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes for the Mindful Schools. Is that the name of the organization?
Yep.
Okay. I know we have at least a few teachers in the audience, probably more that I don't know about. So they may also be interested in looking at that for their classrooms. Okay. Let's start out really basic here. So what is mindfulness? You hear that word a lot, and I feel like I have a general sense, but I don't think I could really define it. So can you help us out? What is mindfulness?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because it is overused in many ways and probably misused in our popular culture. So, and people may have slightly different definitions, and that's okay. So as long as we know if we're talking about the same thing. So the way I define it is mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment with curiosity. So it's paying attention on purpose, not on accident, right?
Okay.
Purposely placing your mind on something that's in the present moment rather than the past or the future, because we often get our mind stuck in either of those places, especially with grief or loss, right? Our mind can go and get stuck in the past or can go to the future about our worries. And so it's being present moment awareness, just noticing what you notice. How do you know that you're sitting? How do you know that you're eating? How do you know that you're breathing? And doing that with curiosity instead of judgment. We're pretty good as humans at coming at life with judgment about ourselves and the world. And how could we harness some curiosity about what's going on, even if it's painful, right?
Okay.
And so you can be mindful of anything as long as you're doing those three things.
Well,
it's pretty cool.
I was going to ask you, you're saying paying attention to something. So is that something inside yourself, outside yourself, either one or both?
Yeah, definitely. So we often we talk about having an anchor when we're practicing mindfulness. There are different ways to practice it too. So one way is a focused awareness practice where you might focus on something inside your body, like your breath or sensations in your body, or you could anchor to something external to yourself, like sound, which is really fun, or sight, any of those five senses, right? So it's really kind of applicable to both those, internal and external.
So sound might be a bird chirping, or are you talking about focusing on a specific sound or opening your ears to the world of sound around you in general?
Yeah, so that would be a different kind of practice, but it's called open awareness. So you could sit and practice and just let any sound come to you, or anything in your environment, temperature, body sensations. So that's sitting with more open awareness versus focused awareness on one particular anchor or one particular thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. And I think I could understand it better if maybe you could also tell me what it's not, or what people maybe get the wrong idea about what it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that question too, because there's so many myths out there. The number one that I think comes up is that people feel like they're supposed to like get rid of their thoughts or erase their thoughts or push things out of their consciousness when they're sitting, and then they feel really frustrated because they can't do that. Well, they can't do that because we're human and our minds wander, and it's really hard to practice mindfulness sometimes and keep our minds focused on one thing. We have tons of distractions in this world that have trained our brains to not be focused. That's probably a whole nother podcast, right? So mindfulness is not trying to like not feel and not think. It's actually about turning towards those things, which is really, really powerful.
Okay.
It's also being touted as like a silver bullet or a magic pill for everything, like every possible condition or illness or what have you. And it's not. It's not a magic bullet or silver bullet or magic pill. It can be part of a whole, like a multi-pronged approach to feeling better in life. But I would never say that it should be the only thing that someone is doing to feel better. And in fact, we don't have a lot of evidence to support it being like the best thing ever. But it is definitely a good thing. And then another major myth is that people think they should be doing mindfulness and feeling calm, and that is not the purpose of mindfulness. The purpose of mindfulness is to build on attention, like we talked about, placing our attention in different places. Sometimes people do feel calm when they practice mindfulness, and that's like an added benefit, but it's not the goal, at least in the way that I practice.
Okay.
And not in the way that many people practice. And so, so if you're expecting to feel calm and you sit down and you don't feel calm because your mind is wandering, like the monkey mind wandering all over the place, you can feel frustrated with that, or like you're failing, and you're not. That's really normal to feel.
Well, so you bring up a good point. I mean, can you fail at mindfulness?
Nah, you can't fail at it, because you're just doing whatever you're doing and noticing whatever's going on. It is just whatever it is. It's pretty accepting in that way when you can practice that way.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So maybe this is too broad of a question, but I mean, why is it important or useful? Kind of big picture, I guess. What is the potential for mindfulness?
Yeah, I thought about this. I think it's why I think that mindfulness is so useful, because we are in dire need of it in this world. And I think what we're seeing, so much anxiety, so much depression, so much stress, so much trauma, and people are really struggling, kids, teens, adults alike. There's a lot of hard stuff. And we are often expected to push it away or move past it. And those things are not healthy. Those are not healthy ways of being, and it's catching up to us, I think, as humans. And so I think mindfulness is like a revolutionary sort of public health intervention, actually, that when people can practice it, it can be part of like that multi-pronged approach to feeling better.
Okay.
But it's really revolutionary in that you get to actually turn towards the crappy stuff, which we don't often have the support to do, at least not in all of our communities, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to for sure later get to where people could find support in mindfulness, in whatever community they are in or online or wherever. But let's keep on these topics a little bit here. So in terms of, specifically for widowed parents who may be thinking about how to help their kids or their teenagers or themselves, I guess, where do you see mindfulness potentially being useful or coming into play, or how do you see that fitting into this, for this audience?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about one of the major benefits of mindfulness is that it can benefit the adults who work with youth, whether that's a parent, a teacher, or myself, like as a counselor. If I practice mindfulness as a counselor, my clients are going to have better outcomes. If teachers practice mindfulness themselves, not necessarily teach it, but just practice it, their kids are going to have better outcomes. Same with parents. And so that's where I think it can be really, really powerful for parents who are listening to your podcast, and that it's so important. I was listening to a previous podcast of yours. It's so important to take care of yourself as the adult in the lives of kids. And mindfulness can be a really powerful part of that. Because it helps us stay regulated and grounded and tuned into our emotions. And it helps us integrate our life as opposed to kind of compartmentalizing, which is unhealthy. And so kids feel that. I mean, I talk about this, like people have probably walked into a classroom where the teacher is not regulated and grounded, and you can feel that energy. And so mindfulness practice can really, really harness that, can really pull that energy together.
Okay. And so I think what I'm hearing is, even if, for example, my teenager said, "Oh, I don't want anything to do with that," and I'm not saying that they are necessarily, but let's suppose they did, it would still be beneficial for me as the parent, as the adult, because I then would be more emotionally regulated, more calm, more better able to handle my job as a parent by practicing mindfulness myself.
Yes, definitely. And when you come into the situation and the equation more whole and integrated, it changes all the systems and people around you. It has like such a powerful effect on beyond your kids too, would be my guess.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And then for the kids themselves or the teenagers themselves, I guess, how do you see it potentially being helpful to them?
Specifically in terms of kids who are grieving the loss of someone close to them in their lives, one of the things that's really difficult with loss is staying self-regulated and being able to take care of ourselves and knowing what it takes to take care of ourselves. And mindfulness can have a really big impact on self-regulation. So if I'm cold, I go put on a jacket. If I'm hungry, I go eat some food. But sometimes that looks more nuanced than that, right? Like I'm really stressed out and I need to go talk to somebody. It really requires knowing what's going on inside yourself to go get the help and take care of yourself in the way that you need. And so I think that there's a lot of emotions that would be normal to come up when there's a loss or there's a death. And like we were talking about earlier, tuning into that is actually the healthier thing to do. And mindfulness can be a way or an approach to do that, which can really make a difference for a kiddo in the long run. Right.
Okay. And is it appropriate or I guess useful, practical something that, is if for little kids, big kids, everybody? Like, is there any age group that you'd say they're not ready for this?
No, I think that you can teach to any age group that you want. Obviously, you're not going to sit a preschooler down and say, sit on a cushion and meditate for 20 minutes, right? There's developmentally appropriate activities for little ones. Just starting with breathing techniques can be a really, really nice way. I have a client who has a younger sibling who comes in and he picks up my Hoberman sphere. I don't know if people know what that is, but it's a toy device that you can sort of open and close, and it can act as almost like a breath. When you open it, like you're filling up your lungs with air, and then when you close the toy, like you're letting the air out. And the little kid has been trained at his preschool to do breaths with the Hoberman sphere, and he just comes into my office and just starts doing it. Huh. So it's actually really powerful at a young age because you can teach these patterns, and it just gets into their brains, and they know how to do it, and they're aware of their breath. And actually, one of the people that I love in the mindfulness world, his name is Chris Willard, and he has a book coming out, I think this month or pretty soon, called Alpha Breaths. So it's like all the letters of the alphabet and different ways to breathe based on those letters. I already have it on pre-order. It's definitely coming to my office.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, I'll have to get the link to that in the show notes page as well then. And also the sphere, what did you call it?
It's a Hoberman sphere.
Okay.
You may have seen it. It was featured on SNL in the last couple of years. Our president was sitting at a desk next to the White House, next to the main desk, using the Hoberman sphere. Oh, so folks may have seen it on there.
I feel like I remembered that episode, but I don't remember the sphere, so I'll have to go back and look for that.
Yeah, it's there.
All right, cool. All right. So since you're talking about different practices, so breathing, what are some other mindfulness practices that, parents could learn about and potentially do with themselves or with their children?
Yeah, well, I could talk forever about this question. I appreciate you asking. Well, as you know, one of my favorite benefits of mindfulness is actually that it helps develop gratitude. And so I love gratitude practices because our brains are really good at remembering the negative stuff, and they're not as good at holding on to the positive stuff. So we can actually train our brains to hold on to the positive stuff and notice it more. So one of my favorite practices that I do at home with my partner daily at night at our dinner time, so you can build this practice around already established habits, is you just list out 3 things that you're grateful for out loud, or you could write them down, and you also say why you're grateful for them. And I took this from Sean Achor, who wrote the book, The Happiness Advantage. He talks a lot about gratitude. And you try not to repeat your gratitudes. Instead of saying like house, family, friends every night, you try to really scan your day for things, small things, just like a hug from a friend, the sunshine, really good coffee, whatever it is, and why you're grateful for that. That's really powerful. And you could even make a gratitude jar out of it. And so you could write those things down, and especially for smaller kids, younger kids who maybe need something more concrete, as they're not quite abstract thinkers yet. And then you can go through that jar later if you're not feeling super good and see all those things. Oh, okay.
That's a good idea. I haven't tried that part. I've been trying with my kids a little bit, and also with some colleagues. We post them, we message them to each other at the end of the day. But I haven't tried capturing them for later reflection.
Yeah, that could be really powerful. And also just like I've heard of people doing like Instagram accounts that are all gratitude based, or sending photos of things that they're grateful for at the end of the day. But spending at least a couple of minutes every day doing that is the dose that apparently makes a difference scientifically. So just a couple minutes doing that. And then, as we talked about before we got on the call, one of my favorites with the little kiddos is gratitude toss. And so I do this in my office with them, and we just toss a ball, which playing toss is actually, playing catch is really therapeutic activity. Really? So yeah, it can really help regulate and build relationship. Okay. And so we're tossing the ball. We don't do the why we're grateful for it, but we just say things that we're grateful for every time we toss the ball. So
Okay.
I toss it to my kiddo and I just say, I'm grateful probably for coffee. That's a pretty common one that comes up for me.
Uh-huh.
And then they build that muscle, and it's really cool to see them become more unique in their gratitudes as I've worked with them over time.
Okay.
Instead of kind of copying me, they'll really start scanning their day. And so I build that into either the beginning or the end of a session usually.
And then, I mean, you're going back and forth 20 times. You have to think of 20 things. Like, how long do you do this?
Oh, I don't know. However many they want to keep, I do at least 3 and then see if they can keep going and do more.
Sure.
Just kind of feeling them out. Yeah. There's no requirement in that sense.
I'm imagining tossing the football for an hour and having to come up with,
Yeah. No, we don't want to burn them out. Just want to inspire a little bit with that.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. I think I might try that. And then what else?
Yeah, so one of my favorites is mindful listening, and it's super simple, and just like going someplace outside the house or even inside the house, whatever feels good or safe or comfortable, and just opening your awareness to just sound. So instead of having full open awareness of anything happening, which can be a little bit overwhelming, really focusing on just hearing sounds and see what you hear. That sounds a little bit funny. Notice what you hear.
Uh-huh.
And, like on a public bus would be a really interesting place, or somewhere near the ocean or the water, in nature, and just doing it for even like a minute, at a time, and then building up in small increments, and just share with what you're noticing. Far away sounds, close by sounds, maybe even sounds in your body. I find mindful listening for me to be one of the most relaxing practices that there is.
And close your eyes then to like block out the visual stimuli.
If somebody, and in a trauma-informed mindfulness approach, you never ask anyone to close their eyes, or you never tell anyone to close their eyes. You always offer it as an invitation, because some folks don't feel safe, and that's okay. If someone doesn't want to close their eyes, that's totally okay. They can maybe pick one place on the ground or on their body to just look and focus there, so that they're not wandering their eyes.
Distracted by cars and
other stuff.
Right, okay. All right, that makes sense. Let's see. So other gratitude practice ideas. What's a sense and savor walk?
Yeah, so that's one of my favorites that combines self-compassion, which is also another benefit of mindfulness, building compassion and self-compassion. So the sense and savor walk would be great right now because of spring. And you just head out from wherever you are, and you walk in silence. And the goal is to kind of just find things that really stand out to you and are really aesthetically appealing. Maybe it's a certain kind of bark on a tree, or a patch on the ground where the cement hits the grass and it's a cool angle. And you just sort of sit and savor those spots. Maybe it's a tree against like a blue sky, or just anything out in the environment that really is pulling you in, and you're feeling some energy pulled towards. And then just kind of walking like that, walking slow and just sensing and savoring whatever you notice. And then an extension of that would be to then go back with a camera or a phone and take photos of those things, bring those images inside and do some art with them.
Like what sort of art?
The way that I was taught was literally just to take the images and create some sort of drawing from those images. But I suppose one could do a whole bunch of collage, print those out and do anything with them. Yeah, really open-ended with that.
That's a cool idea. I have an artist in my family, so we might have to give that one a try.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. And you mentioned Sean Ecor with the 3 gratitudes, and I think he's got something else called the doubler. What is that?
Yeah, so that's basically under the same premise that we're really not so great at remembering the good stuff. And so it's taking a couple minutes and reliving by talking about it or by writing or drawing about it. So like drawing for younger kiddos, an experience you had during the day that was really positive. And so you're getting back into that experience. You're writing all the details. You're remembering how it felt. You're remembering what smells you smelled, all those five senses things. That's obviously a theme with mindfulness, is really getting into those. And you just relive it. You double it up, right? You double up that experience by drawing, writing, talking about it. And then you do it for at least a couple minutes, and that's the doubler.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. So what else? What other gratitude practice ideas do you think widowed parents and their kids maybe should consider?
Oh man, let me think.
If we've covered them all, that's cool. I don't want to miss anything.
No, there's so many, and I'm sure folks out there might have some other ones that they like to do as well. The other one that actually has a really fun video that goes with it is on Soul Pancake. They have folks write gratitude letters, and then they have people read those letters out loud to the people they wrote them to.
Wait, what's a gratitude letter?
So a gratitude letter would just be a letter that you write to somebody and you express your gratitude for their role in your life, or what you're thankful for from them, what they've done for you, or what you like about them.
And it could be somebody in your current life or somebody in your past life, like a teacher or an old boss or somebody.
I think so. And, the way that it's kind of presented, at least on the video, is that it's a person that is currently living. But I think that you could also do that for someone who has passed away. That might be pretty hard, especially after,
I was thinking somebody who's still living, but somebody like that's not a current part of your life.
Yeah, like a teacher. Yeah, they did that. And some people had their siblings that they wrote their letters to, and then it was just so powerful to watch the interaction with the reading of those letters. And I think just writing in general is really helpful for folks, and writing letters is not something maybe that kiddos these days are getting much of an opportunity to do, but can be really powerful too.
Okay, cool.
Whether you send it or not, right, or whether you read it to them or not, still practicing searching for what you are grateful for, scanning, is really what is really the most powerful.
Okay. All right, that's cool. And you mentioned that somebody had made a video of this, which reminds me, I think there is a really cool video about mindfulness that you had shared. Can you tell us a little bit? I think it's called Mindfulness is a Superpower.
Yeah, so I love this video because it's a great intro to what mindfulness is. And in that video too, the guy who made the video, his name is Dan Harris, and he's an anchor on like a big TV station, and he has lots of books about mindfulness, actually, and an app, and also a podcast, as one does these days. And I really, really like his work. His work is around 10% Happier is his gig.
What's his podcast called?
10% Happier.
Okay. I'll link to that in the show notes too. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, and his book is also, he has a book called 10% Happier, and then another book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. So if you're not so sure about this mindfulness thing, I highly recommend reading his books, because he takes a pretty good filter to it all.
Okay. All right. That's great. We'll put those in the show notes too, for sure. And I think I might add to my reading list here.
Yeah, for sure. So the video really goes into what mindfulness is, which we talked about at the beginning. And it really looks at mindfulness as really a way to realize that you have choice in how you respond to the world. So rather than reacting to the things around us, which doesn't usually cause us very much health and happiness, we can actually use some mindfulness, take a breath, and choose how to respond to everything around us, which is what we're faced with all the time, is making choices. And sometimes we feel like we don't have a choice, but we actually do in many situations. And then he goes on to talk about it as a public health revolution or intervention as well. Basically, it's going to become how before, if you ask someone if they went running, he says they'd ask you who you were being chased by, right, or who you were running from, and that. But now we all exercise, right, and that his view is that we are all going to be practicing mindfulness or meditation pretty soon, because we need it in this world, and it's something that has a lot of science starting to back it up as being a really healthy thing for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, brush your teeth and practice mindfulness.
All right, so we'll put that in the show notes. And as I recall, it's an animated video. It's kind of fun, not too long, and I think it's worth taking a few minutes to watch that.
Yeah, it might hook you.
Yeah. I just had something on the tip of my tongue. Oh, so this is reminding me, this idea that you can choose how you respond. It reminds me of something I read a really long time ago in the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah, and he talks about that gap between stimulus and response. And I think it's been a really long time, but my recollection is he says that's where human beings have freedom, the freedom to choose their response. And for people who haven't read his book, he was in the Holocaust. He had terrible circumstances, but he found the freedom in choosing how he was going to respond to those things he had no control over. Yes,
and that quote is often cited in mindfulness materials all over the place. You will see that. Yes, okay. I have not read that book. That is now also on my list to read, the long list.
I might have to reread it. It's probably been, well, I was going to say 30 years, probably 25, but anyway, it's been a while. Okay, and speaking of books, because I don't want to forget about this, you mentioned one time a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Can you tell us about that book?
Yeah, so that one's very much related to trauma, and the author really goes into what we know now about trauma is that we hold that in our bodies, and that in order to so you could go to therapy after you've experienced a trauma and talk, but if you have not integrated the trauma in your mind and your body, your outcomes and your process is going to be slower or stilted, and that we really have to take a look at the body in our healing to heal. It's really important. And so the second half of the book is about different like ways and therapies and things to address trauma and to process and access the body. And I can't remember entirely how he speaks of mindfulness or meditation, but in terms of that role, mindfulness can be in terms of helping with that, your awareness of your body is really important. And we often cut off our minds and our bodies, and mindfulness practices where you're anchored and paying attention to sensations or your breath. Those are body-based practices, which can be really helpful. And at the same time, have to be done with caution with folks who have trauma because the trauma is stored there. So, just putting out some caution. I'm going to tell you lots of book titles, but there's another great book called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. And that book is really, really important right now because we have high rates of trauma and we have lots of mindfulness out in the world. And not everyone knows how to teach mindfulness in a trauma sensitive or informed way. And that's really important. Okay. For just that reason I stated earlier.
Yeah, that sounds like another interesting one. And this is reminding me, one of the episodes of a guest I interviewed before, it was with Lane Pease at Kids Club, and she talked about trauma and the fact that in cases of suicide and homicide, those are most likely to cause traumatic responses in the bereaved. But she said after you take those two, put those two aside, then adults are more likely to have a traumatic response to some kind of sudden death by an illness, or not an illness, an accident or a cardiac arrest or something sudden and unexpected. And children are more likely to have a traumatic response from a prolonged illness, say a cancer where the parent may be sick for a while and there's a lot of disruption in the family for a lengthy period. And so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was, and it never occurred to me that adults and children might have different tendencies, which one would be more traumatic. I mean, I think it makes sense that a homicide or a suicide would be the most traumatic, whether you're an adult or a child.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me throw another question at you here, because this is something that I like to ask a lot of my guests, and I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on it. Sometimes you hear the conventional wisdom said, people will say kids are resilient. And it's often said in a context of, well, they'll be fine. They're resilient. Don't worry about them. Just love them and they'll be fine. And so, and I try to ask a lot of people what they think about that. And I have my own thoughts on it, but I'm wondering what your reaction to that notion is.
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up with that belief too, though, that kids are resilient and they'll be okay, and you just keep doing the same thing. Because we do know that after a significant loss, that actually doing the normal things is really helpful, right? But I do believe at this point, after lots and lots of school and experience with kiddos and teens, that resilience to these stresses and to these losses is a muscle, and it's something that can be strengthened, and that we can actually help kids be more resilient by helping them develop internal and external resilience. And that's where I come at with the mindfulness piece, and therapy in general can help really with that internal resilience. And so we can totally do things to buffer them, right? Yeah. Why wait? Sure. I think there's lots of research that shows that there are actually many kids and people out there who with very little support can integrate an experience that's been really hard, or, quote unquote, bounce back. And that's great, but it wouldn't even hurt. Like, imagine you have a kiddo like that and you still do things to help. I just don't see how that hurts.
Yeah, sure. It can only build their future capacity for emotional regulation and emotional health and mental health and things like that.
And which is what I would want parents to be doing anyway with their kiddos from a therapy perspective, that I would want them to be talking about feelings. I would want them to be practicing gratitude with or without a death in the family, right? Those are just good practices for mental and social emotional health in a household. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, I think, if some kids are more bounce backy than others, for lack of a better word, and you don't know which your kids are going to be. And if you have more than one kid, you might have one who bounces back more naturally than another. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, if I can add one, could I add one thing to that?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I think the reason that our cultural language around this and beliefs have changed is because we know so much more about the brain, and because of the fact that we know that brains can change, and they're elastic, right? That they can change all the way through the rest of our lives, that they don't stop growing. And so I think that concept of neuroplasticity, that the things we do can change our brains, which is why mindfulness is really powerful, or anything that we choose to do. That's why we can build resilience, because we can change the brain with the things that we choose to do. And so that's why we're like, oh, we can actually do something, because we know the brain will change based on experience.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And I think I heard you say that neuroplasticity is a lifelong trait. So somebody like me, for example, or parents shouldn't think they're too old to have their brain still have neuroplasticity or something like that.
Yeah, well, it sounds a little funny, but we used to think that when your brain stopped growing in your mid-20s, that you were kind of out of luck. But you can, and I can, and we can, all the way into our all the years that we have. We can change our brains.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's very hopeful. Actually, that's a great thing to teach to teens. They really like that. Knowing that they can change their brains. It's a powerful approach to take with them.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Well, since I'm shooting for 105 myself, then I have lots of years left for...
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Start now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay, good. So, and you just mentioned teenagers. So, and I think there was a little bit of research about maybe the potential for mindfulness to help teenagers. Is that something that you have any information on? Yeah,
there's a little bit. So I think in general the research has been done more on adults, and so that's where the original research for mindfulness is coming from, and it's just starting to get done with kids and teens both. So we're still needing more of it, much more robust research. But yeah, a research article recently came out saying that mindfulness has the potential to help improve teens' resilience to stress, which they have a lot of. They're actually the most stressed out group in our demographic.
Right.
And that, especially in terms of addressing anxiety and depression, because it helps with emotional regulation.
Okay.
And so we have really high rates of depression and anxiety and stress in teens.
Yeah.
And mindfulness can be a tool, an approach that can really help support teens.
Right. Okay. That's cool. Is that article something that is linkable that we can put on the show notes too?
Yep, definitely can send you that. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be awesome. I'd like to read that myself as well. And that's reminding me. You mentioned about teenagers having the highest amount of stress and anxiety, and that's reminding me of my discussion with Lisa D'Amour, who wrote just a book, her second book recently on that very topic, which was fascinating.
Yeah, so I've just read Untangled. I just finished it. So she has another book out? Is that what you said?
Yes. So Untangled, I think, is the best place to start for parents of teenagers because it's such a good overview and really dives deep in the developmental tasks of teenagers. Her second book just came out earlier this year. It was February, I think. And it's called Under Pressure. And it's about the epidemic of stress and anxiety in teenage girls.
Yeah, that's my next book. I'm going to jump to the top of my list.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good one too. Okay, so and a few minutes ago, you mentioned self-compassion in the context of something else. So, I guess any more thoughts on that or practices that people might be able to improve or practice better self-compassion? Yeah,
this one's so important to me because self-compassion, I think, is something that many of us are lacking, and we're not really taught how to be self-compassionate. We're really taught how to be really judgmental and really critical in the thoughts that we have about ourselves. We would never even think about anyone else. We'd never even think them or say them out loud. Hopefully, most of us would not do that. So mindfulness is a really good sort of antidote to that because you're approaching your practice with curiosity and not judgment. And so that includes thoughts about ourselves as well. And so I actually sort of on a mission to make sure folks get more self-compassion in their lives for sure. That Sense and Savor Walk is also a really good sort of self-compassion practice. And there is an 8-week course called Mindful Self-Compassion course that was developed and is really, really good as a starter place for that.
Is that available online, or do you have to be in a specific place for that?
So Kristen Neff and Chris Germer were the ones who created this. They're not local to Seattle, but the place where I took this class locally is the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing at the UW, the CCFW, and they offer adult classes as well as a teen mindfulness class. And they have tons of public lectures. My favorite, Chris Willard, recently just came out and gave a lecture there. So they have really good folks coming out, and they're doing a lot of research too. So that's a great local organization, the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing out of the UW.
So we'll put a link
and
to
then
that.
there's tons of workbooks also you can find online, especially for teens.
Okay.
There's a woman named Karen Bluth, I think that's her name, Bluth. She created a workbook for teens. I haven't used it yet, but I actually took a class from her at a conference, so I have a good feeling about that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And this Mindful Self-Compassion class that was 8 weeks at the UW, do you think that class is also offered in other parts of the country at other schools?
Yes, definitely. And I'm pretty sure you could take it online as well. I haven't looked into that, but there's a lot of ways to take, mindfulness courses online as well.
Okay. All right. So we'll look for some of those then to include too. Okay. And so before we leave the topic of self-compassion, anything else on that topic?
Yeah. So I just, again, like using our senses. So to be self-compassionate, it requires us to figure out how we need to take care of ourselves. And something that I have been recommending to so many of my clients lately are creating like self-soothing kits. And so you think about all your 5 senses and all the things that would create a soothing quality, like what things would create a soothing quality or a memory for you if you had them in a kit, whether that kit was in your bedroom, your purse, your car, your backpack, wherever it is. Some people really like fabrics and tactile sensations, so having fabrics in there that feel good, lip balm or lotions that smell good, pictures that are beautiful, like, or your family, or natural scenes, right? Or a stuffy in there, or those those heat packs that, those, they're not very good for the environment, but when you're cold out and you can put them in your gloves or whatever. Yeah, those instant heat packs. For me, one of the most soothing sensations is heat, right? So that's a hard one to travel with, obviously. But creating a kit of these soothing sensory activities or just things, and it could be like drawing too, having drawing supplies. Just creating those kits can be really, really helpful.
And I can see that also for kids. Parents and kids may be working together to choose items.
Yeah.
A special bag or zipper pouch or something. The kid could keep it in their backpack or at school or something. Yeah.
It can be a fun process to create.
I think I would put dark chocolate in mine. Does that count?
Yeah, totally. Especially if you eat it mindfully. No.
Yeah, there you go. I'll savor every bite.
Yeah.
Not just scarf it down. Okay, so let me just ask you about acronyms here, because I think you have some acronyms that maybe will help people remember some of these principles.
Yeah, so in the education world, as many folks know, there's so many acronyms and they get pretty annoying, but I would like to take back the acronyms in the mindfulness world and use them for good. And there's so many out there that are really good for helping with body awareness and self-regulation. And so the one that I love the most is Dan Siegel, who's another person I love out in the mindfulness world, also parenting world too. He has tons of books on parenting and tons of books on the mind and mindfulness. I wish I could just study under him constantly. He's great. So his acronym is SIFT, SIFT. So you could do this in the car, like after school or on the way somewhere. And you all decide you're going to check in and you're just going to do the sifting practice. I add a little ing after that. And S stands for sensations, I stands for images, F stands for feelings, and T stands for thoughts. And you just slowly go through each of those and see what's present for you right now. Like what sensations are present, what images, if there are any, what feelings, what thoughts. And it just is a way to check in with oneself rather than check out. And it's good to build these little practices in here and there, and can really help kids understand that they have a really in-depth internal world, which is really important for them to know about. Right.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. And are there any one or two other acronyms that you especially like, or is that?
Sure. Well, I mean, the one that I would say that it comes up the most with families is that it's the HALT acronym, and it's not so much, it's a check-in, HALT, so hungry or angry, anxious, lonely, and tired. If those needs are not being met, then it's really hard to do everything else, right? Yeah. I know for me, if I don't have that T on board, if I don't have the sleep, I am just not going to function as well, and I really can't be expected to. And so kids are the same, and so it's really helpful to have them be able to check in with themselves, like, oh, I am hungry. I need to actually do something to take care of myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, it can really help build those skills.
Right. I like that. That's a good one to remember.
And then the other one that I use a lot too is just the STOP acronym. So stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. And I use with little kids, I just use the S and the T, stop and take a breath. And you can put stop signs up in the house or in different places, just to remember to stop and take a breath. So that point between stimulus and response right there.
Yeah.
Something happens and you're just maybe you put your hand on your chest or on your tummy and just stop and take a breath, and then decide how to proceed. And then observe for those who are more advanced. It could just be observing all the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the situation. And then P is proceed and making a choice.
Right.
Yeah, but the stop sign helps, make it visual for little ones.
Right. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Have we missed any key topics before we get on to the practical things and finding a practitioner, things like that. Anything I've missed that you want to throw out there?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. Yeah.
We have. This has been fantastic. I think we could keep talking about this all day. I could take me to the end of the year to read all these books. I don't know.
Get a book club started soon.
Exactly. Well, we do have a podcast discussion group. Really? So we've been doing that once a month and discussing the episodes from the previous month. So I think
that's awesome.
Yeah, this next one will be a good one because we'll have a lot to talk about, and maybe someone will have read one of these books before that time and can bring back to the others what they learned from it.
That's really cool. I actually have not heard about folks doing that kind of thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been really neat. We've just done it a couple times now, and seems to be working out. Okay, so let me ask you. Lots and lots of books that have come out so far in the discussion that we'll put in the show notes. Did any other books that you think people should know about?
If people are interested in learning about the brain science behind mindfulness, the best one is called Altered Traits, and by Richie Davidson and Dan Goleman, and that's really recent, and it has all the science. So if someone's out there like me and is pretty nerdy and wants to know all that good stuff, that's a really that's a good book to grab. Okay.
All right. Super.
Yeah.
I'll put that one in for sure too. And then are there any so you mentioned the one online class. Is there like a mindfulness portal online somewhere that's like the go-to place for people who want to either learn or get involved or something?
I wish. I know I wrote down a few places that I was going to recommend that people go to first. I think everybody in the mindfulness world may have their own portals that they particularly like more than others. And so you kind of have to work to find your own, the one that matches you. But one of the ones that I was going to say is probably the best place to start is the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, because that's where John Kabat-Zinn, who's one of the founders of sort of Western mindfulness, that's where he first started what we know now as mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, that course. And that's an 8-week course similar to the self-compassion one.
Okay.
And there's tons of online classes and in-person classes there, but as well. And I also saw that they do have a mindfulness-based teacher search button. So wherever you are in the U.S., you could search for someone who is trained, which I highly recommend having them be trained in MBSR, or there's also mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. So as we talked about earlier, there's mindfulness all over, and you really want to find somebody, a teacher who is really well trained and has their own practice, is really skilled, and has support. I would really recommend to people that they be pretty critical about that when they are looking for something for themselves. So I think that's a really good place to start, and I like that they have the search option.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and that was the University of Massachusetts one?
Yeah, Center for Mindfulness at UMass Medical School.
Okay, great.
And then Mindful Schools, which I talked about earlier, where I'm working on finishing my own training through them, because I wanted to make sure that I had some clout behind my name, because it's a pretty unregulated world in terms of mindfulness. It's working on getting better. Mm-hmm. The Mindful Schools also has a certified practitioner directory. So that can be a place, if you're looking for someone local to you, you can kind of check that out as well.
Okay, super.
Yeah. And then there is one more at UCLA. There's a Mindfulness Awareness Research Center, and they have a list of folks who had finished their program on their site too. As another, multiple portal entry points.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's always great to have some kind of starting point and some kind of, because you can spend hours and hours, chasing things down online and then still be like, I don't know, right? So thank you for sharing those starting points. That'll be really good.
Yeah, no problem.
And we do have listeners all over the country and all over the world. Actually, I was looking at the statistics today, and there's a smattering, but there was some downloads in like Jamaica and Iran and Dominican Republic and China, and a whole bunch more. So that was
That's
kind of
really fun.
but of course the U.S. has the largest population of listeners, but it's kind of fun to see it spreading. Okay, and so then, and you're in Seattle, as we said in the beginning. So if somebody's local to Seattle, what kinds of, like, what is your practice like? What do you offer?
In the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So my practice, I call it Marga Road. Marga was my middle name, Marga. It is my middle name, not was. I didn't like it for a long time, but apparently it means sort of path in Sanskrit. Oh. And so I feel like my job and role on this earth is to help people on their paths. And so I do that by meeting one-on-one in the counseling capacity with kids and teens mostly, and some adults too. And then also teach mindfulness, whether that's one-on-one in a small group or in a community setting. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that I'm working on and offer right now, and keeping it pretty simple in that respect.
Okay.
And yeah.
That sounds great. So if people are local, I think you're in the Ballard area, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, in Ballard. And okay. Yeah.
And how can people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so right now the best way to find me is to Google my name, Emily Irwin, and Psychology Today, and they can find my Psych Today link and contact me via phone or email that way. But I'm also happy to give my email or just provide that in the notes for folks to contact me directly, especially if they just have a mindfulness question like we're just talking about and they have no idea, is this like a real thing? Should I go for this? Like, where should I start when I'm interested in this? I'm totally happy to talk about that. I would love to help people get connected to the right resources. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you. So I'll put the link to your Psych Today profile and your email address both in the show notes then too.
Cool.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. I do just have one last question here. If you could say one thing to widowed parents about mindfulness, what would it be?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. So it's actually something that I touched on earlier, which is just it is so important in this world for us to take care of ourselves. And I think that's really the self-compassionate thing to do. And when we put our air mask on first, like on the plane, right? We take care of ourselves. And by doing that, we take care of all of those around us. And it's not a selfish thing to do. And like I said earlier, that when we as adults practice mindfulness, the kids around us will be so much better off and healthier and happier and more resilient. And so I think you can start with you as the adult, and it's just so powerful. And I would just want to support that practice for the adults in the lives of kids.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. My guest today is Emily Irwin, who's a licensed mental health counselor associate and a mindfulness expert. And Emily, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks so much. Grateful to be here.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Emily Irwin as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 24. I've been learning so much hosting this podcast, and I hope you have too. I was thinking back recently to discussions I've had with Dr. Lisa Damore about parenting teenagers, Dr. Justin Yap about widowed dads, therapist Tracy Biebel about parenting kids through puberty, including especially moms raising sons and dads raising daughters, and the very interesting discussions I've had with adults who lost a parent when they were young. I pulled together a guide with some of the main things I've learned from my guests. If you haven't had a chance to grab it yet, you can download it free at jennylisk.com/top10. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.